Welcome to I Caught It on Audio. This is 64 Tacos Book Club Episode 6, Dune, Part 1.
Hello and welcome to I Caught It on Audio. Today we're going to do our book club podcast series. We're going to be talking about the book Dune by Frank Herbert. We're going to split this book into 6 different sections and release one section each week for the next 5 weeks. So let's get right into it. Dan, why don't you tell us how this book starts and we'll get talking about it.
Yeah. So this is Frank Herbert's Dune. It was published in 1965. It's one of the most famous, if not the most famous, sci-fi books out there. It's kind of considered the Lord of the Rings of sci-fi in many ways, partly because of its meticulous world building and scope, but also because it was very, very influential on all the sci-fi that came after. Personally, I have read this book before. I read it when I was probably 12, once or twice. I can't really remember, when I was younger. And then I reread it recently, just before the first Dune movie came out, which we have a water cooler chat on, if you feel like checking that out. In anticipation of that, so I could refresh myself on the story. Did you guys... Zach, I believe you've read it, but
yes.
I'd be curious what you guys all think, what you know about the book and stuff like that.
I have not read it before, as you know, it's a book. That's not typically a thing that I do. I definitely saw the recent movie, the one that with Timothée Chalamet, and I feel like I saw the old what's his name, the director. David Lynch movie, but I'm not certain. I feel like I've seen it on TV or something like that, but never deliberately sat down to see it. Certainly not recently. Yeah, Matt, how about you? What's your experience with the book?
I have never read it. I started the audiobook about 2 years ago and didn't get very far. As for the movies, I've seen the new one, and the David Lynch one I've seen a couple of times.
There was also the sci-fi miniseries that was it was on the Sci-Fi Channel in the early 2000s, I believe. And most people believe that is the closest representation or the closest adaptation for the story. But it's not great because it's obviously marred by the low budget of what a Sci-Fi Channel miniseries movie can do. But yeah, my first experience with Dune was with the David Lynch movie, and it kind of creeped me out because I was just a wee lad when I watched it. And David Lynch is a freak of nature when it comes to movie creations. But what I thought was really interesting about it was like there was some really grandiose story behind the scenes, and that was David Lynch's interpretation of it. And from that, eventually I got around to reading the book, and this would have been probably in, I think, the late 90s. So it was quite a while ago. And of course, you know, I've seen the new movies and the miniseries and all that stuff. And I'm thankful that we're doing this right now because it's a great refresher to go back through it and relive this wonderful story that Frank Herbert created.
Yes, we should mention that we are doing this kind of in the run-up to the release of the second Dune movie in March here, and then we will watch the movie and talk about, you know, the differences and what we liked and all that stuff. I have seen Lynch's Dune. I did not watch the sci-fi miniseries, but of course, as I mentioned, we've all seen the Denis Villeneuve part 1, and we're all going to watch part 2. So let's get into the plot. So this is sort of structured without chapters, which is Dave's favorite, I think.
If we want to address this first off, I don't understand why you wouldn't put chapters. There's clear breaks in the writing, and I just don't get it. Why wouldn't you do chapters?
Well, it is a bit odd, but it was also the 60s. So.
Yeah. I've seen it a bunch of times, but I don't know what the reasoning actually is.
Books from the 1500s have chapters. I mean, it's not like it was a new thing.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I know some people don't use chapters, but I've never heard someone explain exactly why that would be, other than to make it difficult to do book clubs.
Yeah.
It's author's prerogative.
Frank Herbert ruined our lives 60 years ago.
Frank Herbert, what a dick.
So we should explain also that we're breaking this down into 6 parts, right? That the book itself is the logical structure of the book is book 1, book 2, and book 3, and that's pretty much it. And so what we decided to do was chop each one of those books in half to make it a little bit more manageable chunks. So this is the first part, which is the first half of book 1.
Yep. And then that's the sort of the structure that we're going to use. So we just kind of basically chopped them up in a reasonably sensible way, and we'll see how that all pans out. So each of these non-chapters is sort of framed by a quotation from an imaginary book. I think 3 different ones: the Manual of the Muad'Dib, the Child's Guide to the Muad'Dib or something, and then there's another one, the History of Arrakis or something like that. They're all by the Princess Irulan, who we don't know who that is. But,
so your interpretation was that there were non-existent actual books, because when I read it, I always thought that they were referencing something else that existed somewhere else, and we were just getting little blurbs of it, like it was a future thing that she wrote, like a memoir or something like that about her time with Muad'Dib and with the Atreides and things like that.
Yes, in the context of Frank Herbert's world, they exist, but I don't believe he ever wrote these books.
Right.
So in that sense, they're imaginary.
So yeah, Zach, he agrees with you.
Yes,
okay.
Agreed.
All right, good. Because
yes,
I didn't want to have to get my angry pants on.
They appear to be retrospective histories or tales of whoever the Muad'Dib is. I think by context we can guess is probably Paul Atreides, who is our main character, but they're all written by the same person, the Princess Irulan. And guys who you guys listen to Dave and Matt, you guys listen to the audiobooks.
Yes.
If I ever pronounce something different, and I'm sure it will happen, than the way they pronounced it, I'd be curious to hear what the official, or at least on the recording, the official pronunciation of some of these things are, because you don't really get that unless there's a guide to pronunciation, which I don't believe this book has.
Well, I'm a little concerned about that because they didn't say any apostrophes, and it looks like there are several of them in these new vocabulary. So,
well, we all know about your very reasonable hatred of apostrophes, so we'll keep that in mind.
But yeah, well, if I remember how a word is pronounced and you pronounce it differently, I'll be happy to let you know you're wrong.
Yep, same, Matt. Tell me I'm wrong when I'm wrong.
Okay.
Not that that's a thing that you're that afraid of anyway, I think. But.
Am I allowed to tell you that you're wrong when you're wrong too?
Well, if you read it, if you interpret it a different way, if you hear it pronounced different in your head, I'd be curious what that is.
I've only ever heard Muad'Dib pronounced as Muad'Dib, so it was really confusing to me when you said Muad'Dib.
Yeah, Muad'Dib sounds better. I don't know that I necessarily always pronounce it. It's interesting when you're saying the words out loud, which you've never said out loud before. Muad'Dib does sound better.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of how they said it in the movie, but probably like that. We open with an old woman who is visiting Paul and his mother, the Lady Jessica. Her name is the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohayim. She's a sort of a mysterious figure. We sort of begin to discover about the Bene Gesserit, or I don't know how you guys think that's pronounced.
Bene
Gesserit.
Bene Gesserit, who is it appears to be a sort of they're sort of like a quasi-religious faction of, I believe, all women who are trying to guide history and politics in the world. You guys have any other ideas about what that's all about?
They're just like a group of witches. That's kind of what
they're kind of like fortune tellers.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, they seem to have some powers.
They've got some magic of some kind.
Yeah, exactly.
Intuition.
Whether it's an innate ability or something like that.
Yeah, or maybe learn skills that are, preternatural.
They have to train with them. They make that clear.
Yes, there's training involved that gets mentioned. We meet our three main figures of this section, Paul, the Lady Jessica, and the Reverend Mother. Paul pretends to be asleep, but the Reverend Mother figures it out. And then the next day, he meets her with her formally, and she asks him to put her his hand in this box that she has, just like a small box that appears to be completely black on the inside, kind of it eats the light, I think is mentioned. He does so, and then she puts a little needle at his neck, which is called the Gom Jabbar, unless you guys want to pronounce it differently.
Gom Jabbar.
Gom Jabbar. Okay.
Yeah.
And
I'm loving this, by the way. I'm loving this.
It's very strange saying the words out loud for kind of for the first time.
It's interesting because you read a ton, so you've got all these ways that you want to pronounce it based on all of your experience reading. And I've only ever listened to this. And then I'm kind of fingering through it as we're going through this. And like, oh, I can see how he might think that but that's definitely Jabbar.
Yeah. Well, you guys have never seen the words,
Right.
So you don't know how they're spelled. And then probably Zach and I have never heard them spoken out loud, unless Zach, through his dutiful watching of movies, has heard them many times.
Yeah, and that's really where it comes from, and obviously that is based on the interpretation of whoever the movie makers decided to pronounce things. But I think it does make sense in a lot of the ways that they did settle on, and certainly having listened to some of the audiobook, it sounds like that's the way. And I don't know if that's the way that they were sort of told by Frank Herbert's estate or whatever, or maybe his son, or if they just settled on it, or if maybe they just sort of decided that the way the movies were pronouncing them, all these words, were the correct ways and just rolled with it. I don't really know, but yeah, mine is mainly colored by the what I've heard in the movies, and then some subtlety things that I've from my reading, from my what I think it should be in the reading.
Yeah, so we'll keep enjoying those moments. So there's also, during the test is essentially he puts his hand in the box, great pain occurs, and he has to leave his hand in the box. And if he pulls his hand out, then she kills him with the poison in the Gom Jabbar. He holds his hand in long enough. In fact, I think she says longer than anyone has before. And so he passes the test.
Which is funny because is it just an arbitrary time that she makes up? Because you would think if there's some real purpose to this, then you have a set time and you just get to that and you're done, right? But she makes a point of saying, "Wow, you went longer than anybody else." Well, why did you make him suffer longer than anybody else?
I think she was testing him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think
she's there. They have this idea that he's the Kwisatz Haderach, the divine one, the Messiah, and they don't know for sure. And so you're absolutely right, Matt. She was trying to see what he could actually endure, if he is the one.
Yeah,
Also,
see if he's worthy.
Also, Jessica wasn't supposed to give the Duke a son, right?
Yeah, we're going to discover that shortly.
Okay.
But I think she has additional doubts about Paul because of that. The schedule that they're breeding. They have this strange breeding plan where they're trying to bring about the Kwisatz Haderach, and Jessica went off script, and so they think he could be, but it might be too early. So I think that may be why she pushed it longer, because she was almost hoping he would fail.
Mm-hmm.
Giving him every chance to fail at the very least. At points during these conversations, because there's a lot of conversation in this first section for sure.
Yeah.
And it serves the function of explaining the world, the politics, all the details, all the background. Was that a thing that you guys find like frustrating or slow or not interesting? The lack of like decisive action, or do you find it just interesting to learn about the world?
The only thing that I found frustrating about it was the quality of the dialogue. It's definitely sci-fi dialogue.
Yeah, it's a bit stiff.
Without a doubt. I feel like it's the weak point. Now, it's great world building. There's no doubt about it. But I want less of the characters talking and more of the narrator describing, I think. Because I think he does a better job when the narrators are describing. And then the dialogue. The dialogue suffers a lot. I
think some of the stiffness too is also from the classes of who's talking and how they're talking, because there's a part later on where it's just a bunch of like soldier types with Gurney Halleck, and and that dialogue is really like down to earth and much more normalized, but that's because they're a different class of people. They're the grunts, if you will.
Right.
And so I think, I think Frank Herbert was actually looking at the, the way people were talking, and he was trying to have this sort of almost air of nobility with these, with the different houses, with the House Atreides, and they're supposed to be this ruling, sort of a monarchy type of class. And I think that's what comes out in the dialogue. Is that kind of what you're talking about, or you're talking about it's just really stiff in the way that they're delivering?
I did get that. You definitely know when you're dealing with nobility and dealing with the everyday class and all that stuff, and then the soldiers and all that. And you especially know when you're not what is it? Harkonnen later on comes.
Yeah,
you definitely know that he's different. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of sci-fi dialogue. Yeah. It's my flaw in Star Wars movies. It's especially the early ones. It's the flaw in this. And that said, I'm enjoying it. It doesn't. It's like, here's what it's like. It's like a Meatloaf song. The lyrics are cheesy and the music's over the top, but that doesn't mean I can't enjoy it.
That's part of the style.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. I always chalk it up to that's the style of speaking in this planet, in this universe at this time. And it is a bit stiff and formal, and sort of, part of that is maybe because it was written 60 years ago by someone who's trying to write formally. Yeah. And I don't know that dialogue is the strongest feature of Frank Herbert's writing.
No,
I would say it definitely isn't.
Here's maybe a better comparison. This dialogue could very well translate into a 90s video game. And I could love the shit out of that video game, but you might also get lines like, it's because of the fucking pizza that the people underneath are suffering, So
what about you, Matt? Do you have any reservations about the dialogue so far?
No, it hasn't bothered me one bit.
Yeah, you didn't even notice it. Do you like do you mind the world building?
I love the world building. I love this idea of the world where they've kind of turned away from a lot of AI type technology. And
well, that's great. That's what I was going to bring up next. It appears that there are no complex machines. It appears that they're illegal, and perhaps that they once were, and that caused problems. What do you think about a sci-fi world where advanced computers are not allowed?
I think it's really interesting because they've genetically engineered people to fulfill those roles.
Right, the mentats or mentat. How will we pronounce this?
Mentat.
Okay.
There's the mentats, but then there's also the Spacer Guild. I can't remember what they're called.
The Space Guild. Yes, that's a whole thing we haven't really dove all the way into yet, for sure. But we know about it from the movies, for sure.
Well, they talk about them a little bit later in the book, somewhat. But they're. I mean, so we're engineering people to fulfill these roles that we, in modern days use technology to fulfill. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah. So does this, do you guys think that this is our future, thousands and thousands of years into the future?
I don't think we're going to last that long.
do you think, I guess what I mean is, do you think it's intended to be our future?
Oh,
it could be a possible future.
Yeah. No, I think that's probably what Frank Herbert was going for. He was like, well, they didn't have a ton of technology computers and things like that in 1965. It was just very, very in its infancy, and computers were the size of rooms at that time.
Yeah, but the technology was also growing at that time too.
Right.
So
it was, and so I think he was seeing what was potentially coming, and then he was even going further in his imagination to a way far point in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like in the 60s, if you conceived having the world's knowledge at your fingertips in a device that fits in your pocket, you would have been out of your mind, or thought of as out of your mind. So the notion, like they're very specific about you not being able to make something that represents or replicates the human mind, right?
Yes.
yes.
So they instead have taken the human mind and accommodated it to their needs. And I do think there's evidence that he specifically wanted to have this be our human future, because there's a lot of emphasis on whether people are human or not human.
Mhm.
And then there's also a lot of talk about the Orange Catholic Bible, which
Yes.
You don't have to have the Catholic faith necessarily be from our reality, but I feel like that's one indication that he did want to keep have it be this is a potential future for us.
Yeah, that's how I read it too.
And then there's a lot of there's a lot of names like Idaho and stuff like that that are very, very much Earth related.
Yeah.
So I definitely, to answer your question, yeah, I definitely think he presents this as a future for humanity.
Right. Yeah. All right. Cool. So the only other thing that I thought was interesting in here is that there's a point when the Reverend Mother is speaking where she says something that she believes is true, but Paul senses that it is not true on a more basic level. Which I'm not, that's a hint at what his powers might be, and perhaps that he is the Kwisatz Haderach that was foretold. All right, so the next section, we switch to the Harkonnens. Oh, Harkonnens?
Yes,
Harkonnens.
Harkonnens? We meet the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, his nephew Fade Rotha, and Peter de Vries, who is his mentat.
Don't trust
Peter
that guy.
Has we don't trust him based on his name alone.
Yeah, name alone is enough for me.
Peter has completely blue eyes, not just the irises, but the entirety of his eyes. And then basically they lay out what their plan is to betray the Atreides, who Paul is the son of the Duke Atreides. They explain how there's a plan to give them Dune, which is Arrakis, the source of all the wealth, basically, of all the great houses. The Harkonnens have been in control of that for many, many, many years, but now they're giving it by the Emperor's order to the House Atreides, and they are going to basically do that in order to put them in a position where the Harkonnens can defeat them, presumably reclaim the planet and all its wealth. We learn that they have a secret agent among the House Atreides named Yue, and that there will be an attempted assassination, which is meant to fail. But I believe the intent is to sow discord and have them blaming each other and who should have stopped it and all that. And then they intend to invade Arrakis when the time is right. What do you guys think of our antagonists, which is pretty clear that they are?
They seem like cookie cutter villains.
Yeah.
They're very evil. Even in the way that they speak to each other, they're like shitty to each other the whole time. And they give us the thoughts of each person as they go along, or at least the Baron and his nephew, and they don't like each other. They're all, sort of infighting as they go along here.
And I love how they describe the Baron as this, overweight dude who has he's got like fat rolls, and he's got like little suspensor things to hold him up and allow him to be able to walk around.
Yeah.
It's just great description, and really, solidifies the kind of awfulness of these characters.
And what do you think about the use of dramatic irony here, where we know the bad guy's plan before it happens? Is that something that you think is good to know, or would you rather discover it as it happens? Dave, why don't you tell me what you think on that?
Well, I'll be honest. So I'm listening to it, and I should have re-listened to this chapter because I didn't know what was coming when it came. So I'm probably the wrong person. The wrong person to ask on that one.
Well, I have read it several times, and I read it very carefully this time. But I think all the information is in there.
Yeah, no. As you guys are talking about it, it's obvious. And when we got to the point of when it happens, it's obvious, but I did not see it coming like I should have. So
that's my experience. The first time I read it too, when I was younger, I just blew past it because I was expecting a really conventional novel. And I think this is slightly unconventional, and it's sort of the reader knows, but like the good guys don't know. And so you see them sort of figuring it out. And the tension is, I know what's going to happen. Are they going to figure it out in time?
Mm-hmm.
There's also this interesting duality of having the Baron and his nephew Fade as sort of like this bit of a mirror to Duke Leto and Paul. You've got this leader, head of the household, and then you've got the youngling that needs to kind of learn and take up the mantle. And so they're including them, even though they're very young, they're including them with the different plans and meetings and things like that. I loved the line where Baron says, "Listen up, Fade, observe the plans within plans within plans." It's such a great line of like, not only talking about the complexity of what they're trying to achieve, but also like, get in here because this is going to get detailed, and you really need to be paying attention to this.
Yeah, he's grooming him to be the successor pretty clearly.
Yeah.
This is the day after, I believe, the test with the Reverend Mother and Paul. And basically, it's just Paul, Jessica, and the Reverend Mother talking. We find out that initially, before Paul is allowed in the room, that Jessica, as we mentioned, was not supposed to have a son, but rather a daughter. And it's implied, I believe it's actually stated, that they were going to try to join the two houses, the Harkonnens and House Atreides. And I speculate that Fade Routha, since he's of the right age and apparently is going to be the next Baron, would be the person that if Paul was his daughter, was a woman, was a girl, that would marry Fade Routha. But because the Duke really wanted a son, apparently the Bene Gesserit have control of what gender child they have, and she chose what the Duke wanted. And so Paul is allowed in the room. They talk about his dreams. He apparently has some dreams that he remembers but dismisses because they're not important, and some dreams that he knows are important. He mentions one recent dream that he's been having where he meets a girl with completely blue eyes, and she, at one point, she asks about the waters of his homeland. And he's not sure if the word Usul is in reference to his homeland or to him. The home planet of his house is it Caliban? I didn't actually write that down. Caladan, that's what it is. And so he's a little confused about that, but he thinks it might be a name for him. At this point, they tell him that they think it's possible that he's the Kwisatz Haderach, and also that they see no hope for his father, that his father is not going to survive. which he does not like very much, as you could probably imagine. Any thoughts on this section?
In relation to the last part where the Harkonnens are laying out their entire, plans, this kind of like lays out the future of the book without the reader actually knowing about it. So it's more foreshadowing and more sort of future telling. And it's a really interesting writing style, method, because obviously at this point you're reading through it. You've never encountered the story or the book or anything like that. You don't know that these things are going to happen. So it's all just kind of out there, but it is kind of giving you, kind of spoiling the story in a way, by putting a lot of the things out there early on. And I think that's interesting that Frank Herbert did that. But
of course, we as the reader are hoping that these things won't come to pass, and we think, hey, maybe they won't. And then in retrospect, you look back and say, yeah, it was all right there. This is the thing that I think they spent less time on in the movies, giving away the sort of, the Harkonnens explaining everything. And like, I think they do some of it, but it's less obvious if my memory serves.
Well, I think they wanted more surprises or more things to unravel as they went on when they're showing it in the film.
That works better in a movie, I would say.
Yeah, I just want to go back to what you were saying, Dan. And even though I know what's going to happen because I saw the movie, you still hope that like, oh, they're going to overcome this. Like the dad's going to be okay, and they're all going to come out of this. They'll figure out the attack before it happens, especially since so many people know about it. Like,
well, that's the interesting thing. And Zach mentioned the line plans within plans within plans. The Harkonnens know they have a big plan, and we know pretty much all of it. And the Atreides, and thanks in large part to their mentat, knows most of what the Harkonnens plan. But the question is, who's hiding the important thing? And is there one small detail that somebody missed that's going to make the difference? The next section, Paul speaks to, the mentat I just mentioned, Thufir Hawat. How is that pronounced in the
Thufir.
Thufir, like thumper. Thufir.
Right? Doesn't the audiobook say it as Thufir? Thufir Hawat.
I don't remember.
Okay, so it's either Thufir or Thufir.
I'm pretty sure it was Thufir.
Okay, we'll go with Thufir. Thufir Hawat is the mentat for House Atreides, and so he and Paul speak for a bit, not really of anything particularly important other than to meet the mentat, I think. More world building and explaining who knows what and all that kind of thing. And then Gurney Halleck is a new character who arrives. He is not the normal trainer for Paul. That would be Duncan Idaho, which we've mentioned, but he is off planet on Arrakis already in anticipation. So Gurney steps in for him because he's also a warrior. There's a training sequence, a little bit of action, and we learn about the shields. Now, you guys know about the shields from the movie and all the versions, that we've seen. I think this is an interesting idea. The sort of, if you just move slow enough, you can pass the shields. It's almost like those substances that, water's a bit this way. The harder you hit it, the more resistance it gives you.
Is that Calloid?
Could be. I don't know. But like the thing where you can punch it and you can't go through it, but if you just slide your hand in, you're fine.
Yeah.
That's kind of the shield. All right. Dave's got a dirty mind, clearly. So is this relationship advice, Dave? Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Well, Dan, I'll say this. Mood is for kettle and love play. All right.
Yep.
So
when Paul says, "I'm not in the mood," and then Gurney says, "Mood is for cattle and love play."
Mood is for cattle and love play.
I'm not sure what cattle has to do with it, but all right. So sounds like a moo point to me. So
just my favorite line from this section of dialogue.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, the shields. It would demand a very different style of fighting, which I think is an interesting invention. But of course, we're familiar with those, so we'll move on. Basically, we just kind of meet these characters. I don't think there's a whole lot of vastly important stuff that happens here, other than perhaps learning about the shields. Next up, as Paul introduces us to everyone, we meet Dr. Wellington Yue. He, of course, is the one the Harkonnens have managed to turn to their side, but he mostly just explains a few things about Arrakis. He discusses, at Paul's urging, the Fremen and how they have completely blue eyes, and now we have the girl from Paul's dream and the Mentat of the Harkonnens, who also have completely blue eyes alongside of that. This gives us something to think about. So he talks about the planet a little bit, how there are some people who live in the cities and some people who live in the desert. The Fremen live in the desert. He gives Paul a miniature Orange Catholic Bible as he's talking about this, and Paul reads Yue's wife's favorite passage, and then Yue is very upset by this. We sort of discover that is the way that they have turned Yue. They have put his wife in danger. And although he wants to be loyal to the House Atreides, he's, of course, is more loyal to the Harkonnens.
They've got leverage over him to use him as their assassin.
Yes. And I think, do we learn here that his wife is Bene Gesserit?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Mm-hmm. Which is another interesting one. All right. Anything on this?
I thought the description of the Orange Catholic Bible thing was pretty interesting because it sounds like a sort of digital book, maybe kind of like a Nook or the early versions of the Kindle. But it also sounds very delicate, like don't touch it at this part because you'll mess it up or whatever. It's like you're giving this to a kid.
It was written. I mean, it's like written words on, like, I don't remember what they said, but parchment, actual parchment.
It was
but
like
then it's got a magnifying,
parchment
filament. Yeah. It's got a magnifying glass, and it can open to bookmarked areas exactly. And yeah, it was a neat little device.
Yeah. It's a good way to show that there is a lot of technology in this world. It's just AI technology, as we would call it, is the thing that is banned, but they can still have things that would be very interesting to us, especially in the 60s. We move on to the section where Paul speaks to his father, and we learn that his father is very well aware of the trap, which we could guess based on the fact that everybody else seems to know it too. But the decision is, basically flee your position as a duke, or take the trap, knowing it's a trap, and then try to disarm the trap. And he knows a lot of what he's of what the Harkonnens plan, but not everything. And then at the end of the chapter, he mentions to Paul that he's been having, since he was a child, he's being prepped to be a mentat, and that he has the skill for it. Paul's like, "Oh, what are you talking about?" "Oh, wait, I get it. That's right. You wouldn't know when you're young." Okay, gotcha. So we learn more about Paul. Basically, Paul is the sort of has basically all the skills that you can have, and some skills that people are a little confused about. So he has the mentat training. He has from his mother the Bene Gesserit training. And he also has this ability to dream and sense truth. So he's got a lot of things that are sort of indicating that this is a chosen one. Any thoughts, Matt? What are your thoughts on the Duke?
I like the Duke. He's a stand-up, honorable guy. He's not really all that special.
He has a bit of sense of. He doesn't have to be that complex because he won't be here that long.
Not going to invest a lot of pages into developing old Duke.
Yeah.
It is a coming of age story after all.
Yeah, it's clearly about Paul more than it is about his father. And the next, we have now left Caladan, and we have arrived on Arrakis, and we see this through the eyes of Jessica, which we should mention. The Lady Jessica is the consort of the Duke. They never married. That was done for political reasons.
Yep.
But she sort of makes clear that she would like to be married, but she does not want to force a marriage, which she could do with her training if she wanted to, but it wouldn't be real. And there are advantages to not being married, politically speaking, as that makes the Duke eligible as a possible match for somebody else. However, in every other way, they seem to operate as a man and wife. Paul is the heir, so that doesn't really affect anything other than the idea of marriage, I think. So Jessica is basically in the new residence, unpacking and directing where things go. We learn a little bit about the father of Duke Leto. Is it Leto or Leto? How do you guys?
Leto.
Is it Leto?
Leto. Okay. It's the third one?
Yes. Go with the third one.
Leto. As long as it's not Jared Leto. So we basically learned that Jessica, I think, mentions that at one point that there's the kind and loving man, and then there's the harsh, violent man. Those both exist within the Duke, but his father was just the harsh, violent one, and he learned that from his dad. Yeah, the previous Duke was killed apparently like in some sort of bullfighting exhibition or something. I don't know. I wasn't 100% clear on that. If anybody has any more detail.
I took it more as a boar.
Oh, was it a boar?
I thought they said the tusks were by the nose.
Oh, I entirely misunderstood that.
Let me just flip to this chapter real quick. And
yeah, it's in chapter several.
It's in chapter 1.
Chapter something.
It's in book 1, all right, guys? Yeah. Where is it? All right, so we verified that it is in fact a bull and not a boar. Anyhow, it killed him, and the blood is still on the horns.
Mapes was not happy about that.
Yes, she was going to clean it up. Speaking of Mapes, the Shadout, she is the housekeeper. She is a Fremen. She has the fully, completely blue eyes. And she is, perhaps more bold and willful than the average housekeeper that they are used to. But that is because she is Fremen and they are not a very mild people. We learn that she specifically requested that she wanted to serve the Lady Jessica because she is Bene Gesserit, and this is a thing that was mentioned before briefly, but we'll talk about it now. The Bene Gesserit has what they call a Missionaria Protectiva, which is basically because they've been sort of they've existed for centuries. They've been spreading and planting seeds for the prophecies of what their long-term plan was. The Fremen have lots of sort of myths about when the Bene Gesserit comes and things like that. I think we discover more about that as we go along, which it also serves Paul as he interacts with people. But that's how far-seeing the Bene Gesserit have been. They've basically said, well, let's just tell everyone everywhere that we'll have mysteries of what we intend to do, with sort of prophetically speaking, and then when it happens, that'll sort of ease the transitions. And the final thing that happens is Jessica realizes that the Shadout Mapes has a knife on her, and it is what's called a Chris knife, which is apparently carved from a sandworm tooth, which is quite a thing because sandworms we learned earlier, are massive and would have to be very difficult to harvest. They're also the main issue with the wealth on Arrakis. I don't even know if we even talked about the wealth on Arrakis yet, but it's the spice, which is a byproduct of the sandworms. But however, because it's a byproduct, it exists in the desert and it has to be harvested, which draws the sandworms. So that's the great danger, the wealth and the danger on Arrakis.
Isn't it just sandworm poop?
Yes, I believe that's exactly what it is.
Byproduct.
They're very protective of their poop.
Byproduct.
Yes. Oopsie poopsie, and there's some spies. So there's this. She has this knife. There's lots of customs and reverence about the knife, which are presumably somewhat rare, especially for non-Fremen. But she gives the knife to Jessica, and Jessica is able to use her training to sort of fulfill the appropriate steps of the customs to get the Shadout Mapes on her side. Any thoughts on this section before we move on?
I thought it was a pretty interesting little scene. It was very tense, but the confusing part was like the different customs of the Fremen with regard to their crysknife, how that played out. Because I think Lady Jessica kind of thought that Mapes was trying to assassinate her, trying to kill her with the knife. Or maybe not. Maybe she was just kind of like, well, you got a knife and you're not supposed to. So what's going on with that? And then Mapes shows it off, or, brings it out. And it's kind of like, well, I wasn't actually trying to do anything to you, but here, now you have it. I really liked the scene, or the
confrontation.
The confrontation. It was kind of hard to understand exactly what was going on with regard to how she was passing it off and what Mapes' true intentions were and stuff like that. So did you guys get that sense, or was I just like kind of spacing on this part?
I agree with you. I think that there was a lot of confusion on customs, and there was a little bit of feeling each other out. I thought it was done well enough.
Yeah, I like this section. It's sort of there's a tension, and it's Jessica feeling her way through it and kind of figuring out how best to handle it. And then she does well enough, and she passes sort of an unknown test that she wasn't expecting. You have anything, Dave, or you want to?
It was just a more of a character development for Jessica and how astute she was on customs and how she could handle herself. Even though she was potentially in peril, she knew the right thing to do in the situation.
Yep, I think a lot of the benefit of all this lack of action and talk, but like the constant talking and interacting, is that you really get a sense for the characters and you really get a sense for the world. So I think it's one of the benefits of the style. I think it would frustrate some readers as being too slow or not very interesting, but I personally like that.
It also adds to this tension that we don't know who we can trust. We know there's danger all around us, and we don't know who to trust.
Yeah, right, because we don't know either. We're seeing it through Jessica's eyes, so we don't know what the Shadout Mapes intends or what it might mean. Great. Okay, so let's move on to the next section where Jessica comes to speak with Dr. Yue. Yue is, of course, the traitor, and he is very worried, clearly, that Jessica is going to figure him out because of her training. As we get closer to the time that he needs to act, he has a little gambit. He calls her informally Jessica instead of using her honorific, the Lady Jessica, and then he makes himself appear very sort of embarrassed about it, and intending to basically have her chalk up any weirdness to his discomfiture in accidentally calling, the lady of the house by her first name in a familiar way. So there's a back and forth where we're hearing his thoughts and how he's trying to hold back, but you can tell how much he hates the position he's in. He's mad that he was pulled into it in the first place. And then he, at a certain point, thinks he's very close to confessing, but then does not. And as we leave, Jessica mentally thinks rather, that she knows he's hiding something, but she thinks it's not a big deal. And it's just about him trying to be nice to her about what lies ahead here on Arrakis. And so she chooses not to go back and make him divulge the thing that he's been hiding from her, which there's a moment where things could have changed dramatically, but she decides, I think I know why. This is a flaw. This is a bad conclusion, even though she figured out he was trying to hide something. I thought this was a really interesting back and forth. It's interesting to know what's going on in the thoughts of Dr. Yue as they're going back and forth. Did you guys enjoy this little back and forth?
I did not.
No?
No.
I found it really distracting. The constant, oh, my wife's training is helping me. Yeah, just between that and 3 or 4 times they mentioned the Chris knife pressing upon Jessica's whatever. And it's like, okay, I get it. She's got the knife. Okay.
Yeah.
I understand.
And I don't know if you know this, Matt, but some of the characters have blue eyes also. Yeah, it seemed very redundant because you've got the dialogue and then you've got the inner monologue, and it just it was a lot. I agree with Matt on that.
I think it could have been done better. It's not a terrible interaction, but it could have been handled a little better.
Zach, do you hate this as well?
No, I didn't hate it. I thought it was kind of interesting how, he's thinking about what he has to do to try and to get her off. Not that's the wrong. Maybe get her off the scent is what I was going to say.
Would you like to say that sentence again? I can just edit that out.
Yikes.
He had to try and figure out what way to try and milk her. No, you get what I'm trying to say.
Yes,
I'll say it better. He was trying to figure out a way that he could say or do things that would move her out of the direction of thinking that he was actually the traitor that he is, that we know him to be.
Yeah, and then ultimately he lands on telling as much truth as he can.
Yeah,
right? Yep. This is the scene we're in.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Yeah. This the stuff that you Dave and Matt didn't like, that never occurred to me. I guess that could strike one that way for sure, because that's the way it struck you. But
and it might be the difference between listening to it and reading it.
Yeah, because
it could come off completely different reading it.
You've got the voice actor doing his line, and then you've got the narrator saying the thoughts, and then you've got the other voice actor saying a line, and then the narrator saying her thoughts, and then it didn't translate well, and maybe it is better read, but it was not particularly interesting.
Yeah, that could be something. Sometimes things work better on the page than they do out loud, for sure, and vice versa. All right, we'll move on to the next scene where we get Paul, basically the aforementioned assassination attempt by the Harkonnens, the one that's not supposed to succeed, but has to look like it was meant to succeed. They have hidden what's called a hunter seeker, which is like a tiny deadly, like mechanical fly type thing. It has to be operated remotely, but reasonably close. So that means that there is somebody who is a traitor who's on the premises.
It's like a long needle, right?
I think so.
It's not like a bug. It's
the way they showed it in the new Dune movie. Maybe is making me think that it's more like a bug, but I always thought of it as a small flying thing, which is maybe why I call it like a bug or an insect. But it
was like a sliver of metal, so I thought they described it as.
Yeah, but it has to move somehow. I don't know. I don't know exactly whether it has wings or whether it has some other propulsion or how it works. But
I think it's the Force.
It could be midichlorians. That's a good point. Sometimes it's better not to explain, I think, is the lesson we all learn.
Yeah. You don't need to explain everything.
Or have a better explanation if you're going to do it. So he is getting up to go explore on his own. In many ways, he's a very mature for a 15-year-old, but in some ways he is acting like a 15-year-old, and he wants to go explore the house without, having security detail with him. Because he's curious. So he gets up to do that. That's when the hunter seeker comes out, and if you stay still, they have trouble seeing you. So he stays still, but then the Shadout Mapes, who was sent by his mother to bring him to a meeting with his father, opens the door. At which point the hunter seeker dives for her. He dives for the hunter seeker, catches it, and saves her life. They have a brief interaction, and then the Shadout Mapes mentions that his mother rather, was in the weirding room, as she calls it. So Paul goes to find his mother, basically. This was one of the few action scenes we got in this section of the book. I thought this was interesting, and it showed both Paul's training and his physical abilities. What do you guys think?
It was interesting. It's hard for me when they present a situation where the character wasn't ever actually in peril. Like, if anything, Mapes was the one in peril, and that she was probably the one we needed to be concerned about. And so Paul got to be the hero in that scenario. And I understand he wasn't supposed to be in peril. This was more of a plot-driven scenario to move the Atreides, to give them evidence that there was foul play, more than it was to actually put Paul at risk. So I'm not a big fan of that type of thing, but it was fine.
Well, I read it or listened to it more as Paul was at risk, but it was kind of a less than strong attempt. It's kind of like, well, we'll do this thing so they think they discovered one of our traps. And if it works, that's great, but it's not our intention that it's going to work.
Well, I almost think that the Harkonnens didn't want it to work. I think the Baron was like, well, Peter said it has to be a good attempt. We can't just, it can't be obvious that it was, so it has to be dangerous, but we have to think that there's a decent chance that he will survive it. Right. So I think there was some risk in the air, because that was mentioned earlier that it wasn't, the way I took it was, oh, there is some danger because it has to be a wholehearted attempt. We don't think it will succeed, but what if it does? That wouldn't be great for our plan, because that might lead the Duke Leto. It might lead the Duke to change his plans and be able to accuse them overtly of actually assassinating his son, and that might change the way it all works out. Yeah, so I thought there was some tension there.
I guess it's more that I'm cynical that the main character is going to die in the first sixth of the book.
Of course. But of course, that's a problem with
that's why I didn't
all
feel
media, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I guess that's one way to look at it. But again, then don't watch movies, because most of them,
that's the thing is I do appreciate it that they turned the actual, like, Mapes was genuinely in danger. And that rectified the scene for me.
Okay.
Like, the whole time where it was Paul, I was like, I mean, we know nothing's going to happen, but then they introduced the actual peril.
Right.
Well, we know what's going to happen, but Paul doesn't. So from his point of view, he's probably shitting his pants.
Right.
It's more about how he handles it than it is.
Yeah. I think it was more about showing how trained and intelligent he is. He knew how to handle the situation.
Right. In the same way that Lady Jessica handled the Chris knife situation with Mapes.
Yep. The weirding room. Jessica finds a door that she hasn't explored yet at the top of a spiral staircase. As she's about to go in, she sees the shout-out Mapes, and she sends him to wake Paul. So now we know that we're running the concurrent events from her perspective. Jessica uses her training to open the locked door, and then she finds a room that I think they say it's 10 by 10 or 100 square feet or something. And it's basically a small, like, climate, like a humid climate room inside of the desert planet, which doesn't exist anywhere on the planet unless you create it. Full of plants and humid air. She mentions that she thinks that the water that they spend on this could support 1,000 lives on Arrakis. It's a way of the wealthy to show they don't care about water. It's not important to them because they're wealthy enough to be able to waste it, because it is a waste of water. She walks further in and then finds a note from the previous resident of this house. This is not where the Harkonnens stayed. They chose to stay in a different city. And in this house, the Margot Lady Fenring was the previous person, who was also Bene Gesserit, we discover. And she leaves a code in the note, which appears to just be hey, this is a place that I came to enjoy. I hope you enjoy it as well. There's a code that indicates to her that there is information, and she eventually figures out that there is a secret code that's been placed on the plant. There's a leaf directly over the placard that has this note, and so that plan warns of the attack, which is ongoing at that exact moment elsewhere in the residence, and some more details about the Harkonnen plan. She doesn't know everything because apparently her husband was not actually part of House Harkonnen, because he was, I think he's more associated with the Emperor. So she has some details, all of which we already know, but now Jessica has had another warning from another source. As she discovers this, she's about to go run to save her son. And at that moment, Paul opens the door because he came to find her. And they discuss the possibilities of who the traitor could be, whether it's, I think they mentioned Yue and Hawat. I don't know if they mentioned anybody else. I don't remember anyway. Then right before they leave, Jessica notices that there are some flashing lights in the distance, which are likely signals between Harkonnen agents, perhaps to convey word of what happened. Yeah, do you guys have any thoughts on this section?
I thought this whole section was pretty convoluted.
The previous section and this section combined, or just this section all on its own?
I thought this section, after having just had the last two, the whole Mapes traveling between all of this, it was so much. And then they must be using flashing lights because otherwise we'd be able to detect their signals. Are you telling me there's only one means of communication? And so we've got to resort to Morse code or something like that with flashing lights. It just feels like creating a problem so that you can have a solution for it. Like, okay. Why does this leaf, why do we need to leave a note in a leaf on a plant that the person might find eventually someday? And then it happens to be at the exact moment that the thing is happening. And now we've got the flashing lights, and just pretty convoluted.
There is an element of coincidence and chance here.
Yeah.
Well, is it, or is it the Bene Gesserit training? And she knew that she would find this room, and she knew that she would find the notes and figure it out.
Yeah, but if you actually
the timing is improbable.
Yeah, if you had concern for the well-being of the people at risk, then maybe don't hide it in some random plant.
Although you could argue that that's because
you can't be open about things.
Yeah, exactly. But yes, I would agree with you, Dave. The timing of all this is very coincidental, and it just serves to smooth some plot along, and it's not that likely. But the other stuff makes sense to me. I mean, the flashing lights, I don't know. I never really thought about a different way that they would communicate. It makes sense in that the attack just happened, so that's the moment when you might see the flashing lights out a window you're looking, but you could argue that that's entirely too coincidental as well. But I never really thought about it that way. But yeah, Zach, what are your thoughts on this? Is this a step too far in coincidences?
I think the only thing that's kind of strange to me is I don't really know that much about the Lady Fenring and why they were there before and how long. Like, so how long did she know about this potential plot enough to set all this up? I mean, I think that's the thing that I'm kind of agreeing with Dave on, is that it's just, were they there, and then she did all these little coded messages, and then they took off, and then, like a couple weeks later, that's when the Atreides move in to the Arakeen Palace or whatever this place is. It just seems like it's a little too conveniently timed in an odd way.
Yeah, the fact that it was found at the exact moment that the attack was happening is a little stretches. I mean, you could find it whenever, I guess, but she and her husband were mentioned when the Harkonnens were talking earlier.
Very briefly, yes. Yeah.
That's all we know about it. I think at this point,
they were the ones that were living in Arakeen, obviously.
Yes,
right?
in this residence where the Duke decided they would set up, rather than where the Harkonnens were living.
So was this message written on an actual leaf? Like, I could go grab a leaf off the tree in my backyard and write the message on that? That's what they're talking about. It's not like a figurative leaf, like how the worm poop is spice.
Yeah.
type thing. It's like an actual leaf.
Yeah, and there were like, and she did
Yeah, then
like
I
little,
definitely
like,
don't like the scene.
like some sort of braille type bumps on the bottom part.
Yeah, that she clearly placed something on the bottom. I don't know if it was like little dots of glue or
bumps in the alley,
or bumps on the alley, and they figured it out. Yeah. All right. So that is the end of that sequence, and then we move on to the Duke's perspective. He is understandably angry that the attempt was made on his life. That was something that they didn't know beforehand. They only found out about that as it was happening when the Lady Jessica in the previous scene. That was something that they were not prepared for. Specifically, he meets with Gurney Halleck when he comes in, and sends Gurney Halleck off to go convince some of the experienced people who are choosing to leave to stay by offering them more money and positions and things like that. And this is basically more just I think this section is basically the Duke's angry, and will that affect his decision making? And then there's some nuts and bolts, like, oh, okay, this is what we're going to do with these people. Thufir or whatever it is needs some people. Gurney, go send him some people. Not a whole lot happens in this section.
I wanted to ask Dave and Matt about the audiobook. So in the text, I believe it's the Duke's thoughts, where he keeps saying over and over again, they tried to murder, or they tried to kill my son. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious if that came across in the same way in the audiobook. Did they do that as a repetitive, narration?
Are the thoughts of characters in the narrator's voice or in the character's voice? So anything the characters audibly say, is there's a voice actor for a different actor for each, at least the main parts. Each have their own actor. And then there's the narrator who tells us the big story, the scenery and all that. And then also the inner thoughts as the characters are thinking them.
Okay.
And then just tangentially related, there's a third or a second narrator, if you will, who reads the script from the Princess Irulan. And that gets some special effect treatments with some sound effects and all that stuff to give it this extra presence and gravity of importance. Matt, does your version have all that as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're probably listening to the same version. Yeah. I think the production of it is very well done. Some of the voices are a little over the top, but it's like theater over the top.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And deliberate. I like it,
Yeah.
So I have no complaints about that as production.
Matt, are you enjoying the experience and the production quality?
I am. I think it's really well done.
I was just curious how that played out because the Duke says that in his mind like 5 or 6 times.
Yeah,
because he's so pissed that they
I thought my CD was scratching for a minute there, but then I realized it's on my phone. So, but yeah.
All right, and then we move on to our final section of this first part. I think of it as like the council, basically the Duke and Paul and Thufir Hawat, and I think Gurney Halleck is there as well, and then a bunch of other dudes. They all get together before the meeting actually happens. Thufir Hawat tries to resign because of his failure to catch the plot. Both the Duke and Paul are like, no, one got by you, but it's because it was too straightforward an attempt that you didn't suspect.
It was too easy. We didn't think they'd do something so simple.
Yeah, they don't want to accept it, and they want him to stay there. And then I think the Duke says he'll work even harder now because of his frustration at failure. And then the meeting begins, and basically this just explains the whole what they're facing, how much money is at stake, what the Duke's plans are to harness the Freemen as fighters, I believe.
The Fremen?
Yeah, did I say Freemen?
Uh-huh.
That's how I said it when I was 12.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's probably derived from that.
Yeah, but I know it's Fremen. But I'll probably say Freeman again someday.
Never.
Fremen, the Fremen will be the fighting force because they're known to be very fierce people, almost impossible to eradicate. Even though the Harkonnens clearly tried very hard to do so. During this meeting, Duncan Idaho arrives, and we meet him for the first time. He describes some of his adventures with the Fremen, and then he reveals that he has also gained a crysknife.
So they ask him to show them because everybody's heard about these things but not actually seen one, and so he wants to. So he brings it out, and he's not fully familiar with all the Fremen culture yet because he's only really been with them for a short time. And then Stilgar arrives, one of the Fremen siege leaders, and says, "Do not unsheath that because they have specific customs that mean that somebody has to be bled or killed if they
Cleansed.
take the knife out of its sheath."
Yes, exactly. So there's a back and forth, and now we finally met I guess you'd call it a wild Fremen, like not someone working in the city, but someone of importance from out in the desert. And he's a very terse and straightforward individual. They find a way to sort of have a tentative agreement when Stilgar, to show his sort of approval of the current state of things, because they're understandably worried about the new people on the planet because the last were trying to kill them the whole time. So he seems to be thinking that the new house is a good one. So he spits on the table, which pisses everyone off because it seems insulting. But it is explained by Idaho that is a great honor because he's giving up his water, and that's such an important thing on Arrakis. So Idaho spits on the table as well. Then Idaho is offered basically membership or a place with the Fremen. And there's a bit of a negotiation where he's still allowed to be loyal to the Duke, but also to the Fremen. Duncan Idaho agrees to this idea, and then off he goes along with Stilgar. Paul thinks to himself, this meeting didn't end very well. It was kind of petered out. And then there's a couple of times where he thinks that some of the ideas that his father has or decisions he makes are not the wisest. And that reminds him of the Reverend Mother predicting that his father has nothing in his future. And that wraps up as far as we got. Do you guys have any thoughts on this? I think this was one of the more long, drawn out sections that we had.
There was no shortage of accounting in this section. And I know that's something sci-fi fans are into, accounting and bookkeeping and all that stuff. So it makes sense. But I think my big qualm with this, I loved the Fremen character. I thought he was great. But how did Duncan Idaho come to have a crysknife and not understand its importance? That's what doesn't make sense. Like, clearly, I don't know if it was explicitly said, but my assumption was it was gifted to him, right?
I thought he was there was something to do with another character that owned that crysknife.
There was a messenger that was dispatched to warn them about something, and that messenger died, and the messenger had the knife.
Yes, as the messenger was dying, he was being
Fremen
attacked.
Messenger?
Yes.
Okay.
And Duncan was trying to help him.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
So I think he was allowed to keep it.
Sense.
But it wasn't a formal offer with an explanation, that's for sure.
I feel like if he was allowed to keep it, like there was an acknowledgement prior to this that he's worthy of having it, then there would be some explanation of the responsibilities that go along with owning it.
Here's the manual that comes with this knife.
I see what you're saying,
If it's such
Dave.
a big deal,
I see what you're saying.
If a Fremen sees him with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I see what you're saying, but at the same time, I think the Fremen, to some extent, assume that people know, and maybe that's a flaw. But you'd think he would have warned the council that I'm about to spit on the table, which is a great honor. Instead, he just spits like this. We are who we are, and people just need to know.
Duncan Idaho, having already had this blade, was more of a plot device to explain further the importance of the crysknife. I don't feel like that was well thought out.
Yeah, maybe it is a mechanism for world building, because I do think that first and foremost, world building is what Herbert is after.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe that's a little awkward, but it is also in character for the Fremen to not explain themselves, I would say.
Yeah, we haven't met a lot of Fremen at this point, so
True.
you very well could be right.
Certainly Stilgar is not interested in explaining himself any more than he has to. Yeah, so we've wrapped up this first section. Any overall thoughts that you guys want to add? Are you enjoying it so far?
I'm enjoying it, despite my constant
your constructive
obstinate
criticism.
Yeah,
you got
despite
my scrolled, Frank.
Despite my constant criticism, I am enjoying it. Yeah.
No, it's fun to talk about the stuff that, because no book's perfect, and I would say this book, as much as I have enjoyed it over the years, is not perfect. So it's good to talk about some of the things that pop out, because it's different for everybody. Some of the stuff you mentioned, having read it several times, it never occurred to me, and you're like, oh, that's actually a decent point. It just didn't bother me in the moment when I was reading it.
For me, the interesting parts are like the things about how they are talking about, technologies of the past and how they don't want those anymore. They basically outlawed them a long time ago. That was kind of little details that I missed the first time through. And I think it does make you think about, where did this whole thing come from? And is it supposed to be our past or our future potentially, like we talked about earlier? And I think it does a good job of kind of like juxtaposing the future with the past, because there's so much in this that is relatable as far as things that, because in my mind I always took the spice to be this precious resource, which I always took to kind of be like equated to like oil, and the oil of the Middle East, and the oil barons, and people who have control of that resource have lots of money and can do lots of other things. So yeah, and it's fun going through this again and kind of seeing some of the more nuance that he put in the writing with regard to how the past was and how that relates to this very distant future, which I don't know if we said it, but the dates that when they do show up are in the 10,000s of whatever that is supposed to be measured by.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Matt, what did you think, Matt?
I really am enjoying it. I love the world building. I love the little bit of political intrigue we're getting, but the more the sense of it's okay to kill your enemies. It's just okay. It's expected almost.
Right. It seems the way of the world for them, yeah.
And then there's the overlay of the religious tone with the Bene Gesserit. So it's a really, really neat world to dip your toe in, but I don't think I'd want to live there.
No, not on Arrakis.
No, probably not.
Yeah. Or not 8,000 years in the future.
If I got to go hang out in the weird room, then maybe. But
yeah, but there'll be all sorts of weird messages on leaves and stuff, and you wouldn't like that.
I hate that.
Too many flashing lights, probably too.
Yeah, never mind. I hate the weird room. All right. Anything else, you guys?
No, I think we're good for this one.
All right. Tell us what you think of this first section of Dune in the comments. Like and subscribe if you do that kind of thing. If you want more content like this, you can find everything we've done at 64tacos.com. And if you really liked it, go to buymeacoffee.com/64tacos, where you can buy us a taco. Thanks for listening.
I caught it on audio.